I'm going to start. Hi, everyone. My name is Clemence. HelloFresh just turned 10 years this month, and I also had my 6 years anniversary this month. So I realized that on the one side, I went through a lot of different data maturity levels. On the other side, I'm really a dinosaur at HelloFresh. So what do I do at HelloFresh? As part of the global data leadership team, I am transforming our business and our data culture, which means not only driving data maturity, but also driving maturity in a way so that it's really woven into our DNA. So what I'm really trying to do is, Molly mentioned culture before, definitely culture is a very big piece of this DNA, so that we can determine every decision and enabling processes. I met Scott and Molly around 2020. This is where I started to hire and build teams around 4 different levers and pillars around data management, data governance and compliance, data literacy, and data process management. And I'm very happy to share insights, learn more things, very happy to learn things. And yeah, that's who I am.
Awesome, thank you. And for folks who just joined, I'm Molly. I lead up content at Monte Carlo. We're a data observability company. Today, I'm excited to host a panel with Clemence, who just introduced himself, Trupti, and Celina. They're all awesome data leaders in the space, building and scaling data analytics teams and data organizations. So I'll have all of you kind of introduce yourself. Trupti, how about you go next?
Hey, hi everyone, I'm Trupti. Currently I am at Afterpay. I lead their card product analytics and strategy program product. And yeah, I've been here for, I guess it will be a year in the first business day of January. I think 2021 is that's how I started. Before that, I was at Uber, and throughout my career, I've had the data arc, some analytics, strategy, consulting, even arc, and a fintech arc. So that's been the 2 common grounds in my career, which I really love, going deep into data. I'm an engineer by training and love fintech and payments. So I'm lucky to have the risk, growth, and now card strategy as payment provider, more so not like a merchant. For Uber was a merchant, Amazon was a merchant, eBay was a merchant. And so it just gives you the more angles to look at and different use cases and problems to solve. So yeah, I will leave it at that. A quick plug, our company is hiring. My team especially is hiring. So if you like what you hear today, do apply.
Thanks, Trupti. Awesome. Yeah, everyone on this panel has awesome companies that you should totally work for if you're looking for a new gig. All right, Celina, passing it off to you.
Awesome. Well, that was a great leeway, Trupti. I'm Celina, Director of Analytics at TULA Skincare. We are also hiring. TULA Skincare is a probiotics extract-based company based out of New York, although we recently announced we're fully remote. And the awesome quick story back there is a lot of skincare companies, doctor founded, are often dermatologists founded, whereas we were actually gastroenterologist founded. We can dig deeper there if you want. But otherwise, my career has spanned from, I actually started in finance and transitioned into data. So I can share a bit more about that later as well. And otherwise, in terms of building team, I've built my team on 3 pillars. One is around digital marketing. The second one is around revenue analytics, and the third is around analytics engineering.
Awesome. Very cool. Sounds like data is very much integral to TULA as a company, just beyond analytics. That's really cool. Awesome. Well, again, thank you all for joining. And so I guess kind of the first question that I often ask when I host these panels, and I'm talking to data leaders who are kind of rapidly building their teams, is if you're analyst number 1 or management hire number 1, what is the first role or set of roles you usually hire for? So Celina, why don't you start?
Sure. Yeah, I've been data hire number 1 3 times now. So have quite a bit of experience in that realm. I think the first few hires I go for immediately number one, it depends on what you're supporting. So in my case, it's e-commerce based. So going after digital marketing, right? Understanding what is or is not working, proving out the case for your team. Oftentimes, when we talk about ROI, what is the impact of your team? And that's how you are able to get buy-in for hiring, right? Like, what are you going to be able to help impact the business with, which is often around marketing. Of course, that's backed with analytics engineering, or better, otherwise known as data engineering, because without data integration, you can't run the analysis. And I think third to that, the other way we've proven ourselves is helping the company better forecast and predict what is coming ahead. And so that's the revenue analytics function that I had mentioned. So that's how I've, over my 3 startups have thought about, what do I need to hire first? And in that lens, how do I prove our impact immediately?
I muted myself. Thanks, Celina. That's awesome. Trupti, we've talked about this a lot. How do you decide who to hire for? And to Celina's point, how do you measure kind of the potential impact of those hires?
Yeah, I think I would echo most of the points Celina made. It's kind of like baking a cake, right? You can't start with icing. You have to make sure that you have the right foundation. So I have also been first hire, I think now 2-3 times in a row, but it kind of is as daunting as it might sound. It's actually good. I first just scope out the landscape, like Celina also mentioned, you might want to be that resource first and see where the broken link is at, and then hire for that first. Again, going with the cake analogy, like if you have the cherry ready, but your cake is not baked, it's going to just sit and not have what it's supposed to do, right? So usually it's data engineering, or analytics engineering, because that's where that kind of gets you the data to analyze. Like if it's not in a certain format, not everyone is full stack enough that they can go jump in. And what I mean by full stack is going all the way from bottom of the stack, like making the logs convert into Piper jobs into tables, which then become accessible for the typical business analytics folks to then analyze and build models and what have you. So I would say scope out where the weak links are, and maybe hire either for that specific function. That would be fantastic, because then your weak link will be very strong, or just hire a generalist. If you're pressed in time and you just have to give some JDs, I would hire someone who can wear multiple caps and jump in wherever it's needed. It might not be as fast to fix that link, but then they're malleable enough and you can hire that way.
Great. That makes a ton of sense. And so, Clemence, I'm going to ask that question to you. And you just told us that you celebrated your 6-year anniversary at HelloFresh. So I imagine a lot has happened since you joined. Can you kind of walk through like where the team was at when you started, and when you got there, how did you decide how to build it out?
Yeah, so the cake got bigger and bigger, Molly. We first started with the foundation first, and foundation, most of the people are looking in data for reporting, right? For insights, dashboards. So most of the time it was an analyst team that we started to build. I hired BI people, but as Trupti said, the BI people at some point they are moving towards either a more engineering side because they have more technical needs, or you are going into more let's call it analytics translation, more into the BI and analytics side, at some point ending in data science, the data science area. So I would say if you really want to hire somebody in the early stages, hire a unicorn, kind of like the flower for the foundation, because there's a lot of things to do. And at some point, the more the maturity increases in the organization, one role will lead themselves to follow another. And at some point, a data analyst, for example, becomes a data steward, right? And it goes on and on. So in very early stages, a generalist with, let's say, a focus either on technical or on the business is always a good choice.
That makes a lot of sense.
And this is how we evolved, Molly. Basically, always change by change, transformation by transformation, we had to recap and rethink our job definitions and our roles and define them every cycle again together with our team members.
Right, right. And a question that kind of, jumps off of that and gets a little more granular is, okay, you know you need to hire these folks. How do you make the case with leadership for budget or resources or whatever it is, particularly given that I feel like being data driven is such a buzzword now. Like it's table stakes basically, but also at the same time, it's really hard to quantify, particularly for, industries. I guess all of you are kind of in industries that are not, maybe fintech is very data driven traditionally, but commerce and beauty, like how do you justify analytics to the broader leadership team? And I don't know, Trupti, do you want to start that?
Sure. Yeah. That's a great question. And I think it's a struggle every time planning is getting made and these OpEx budgets are baked. But I would say my philosophy is ask for the headcount for the future, not so much for the present. And what I mean by that is if you want that person or those headcounts to build you a data lake or a data mart, after that is done, what are you going to do with them? So it's going to be disappointing. Think about what's the trajectory or the arc you're giving to the person. These are people, their careers are involved. People are very passionate about their careers and where it's taken. So you need to have that arc. And if you just fill in the gap for now, and granted, we only have barely 5 years of like horizon that we can look at given how fast things are moving, but still hire for where the company is going, where your team would be going, and where that product is going than what I need right now. Because there are different ways you could fill that gap. There could be someone who wants to do it currently, or interns, consultants, tools, vendors, etc. So when you hire for a headcount, a lot of people use the ratio model, which I'm not fully against or for. It's a time and place where it fits. If you're just starting off, that might be a good back of the envelope math. Like I'm supporting 20 people. I at least need 5 on my team. So it's a decent ratio, whatever your ratio might be. But as you scale, you can use it only once. My rule is that you can use it once, but the next time you can't scale with your stakeholders, because we are kind of like silicon chips. Like the more we are going to automate our work, we're going to need lesser and fewer resources, especially with the depth you will have and the building skill set and mindset that we have. So I think Celina touched upon this too. So impact is how we are going to measure ourselves. So go backwards and show with these 2 people, I can give you this much more in say GMV, GB, whatever, TPV, whatever is your bottom line, top line goals that a leadership looks at and quantify it and work backwards that way. And if you have a track record, I think it will become simpler and simpler. But that's my long and short answer there.
Right. That makes sense. Clemence or Celina, any other kind of perspectives on that?
Yeah, I think, jumping in and piggybacking off of what Trupti said, I think planting the seed is certainly the case. And in a way, regardless if you're in a data capacity or not, right? It's always planning for the future, starting the idea and getting the buy-in. I think the hiring for the present is definitely showing the backlog. If you're like point to data, it's easy to point to, look at all the things you've asked for or across the company we're supposed to be answering. And if you had to prioritize all of them, look at all the things and revenue costs impact that we're not getting to. And that's hiring for the present. And I think the third thing I think about is I've had this discussion with quite a few folks in the data industry, which is who do you report to? So who you report to has a big impact on how easily it is or is not to get resources. If you report and support a revenue generating organization, I will say budget is there or it's easier to work with in my experience, versus when you report to more of back-end support functions, it's harder to fight for resources in general. And then especially when you're a data team sitting with under back-end support.
Yeah, and this also, and I'm sure Clemence has some thoughts on this, but like the way that you structure your data team, like who do these people report? I mean, who do your direct reports report into? Do they report into like a central data organization, or is it decentralized across different functions? And you know, Clemence, feel free to weigh in on the earlier question or talk about structure, whatever makes most sense. But they're a bit related in terms of quantifying impact. So, what are your thoughts?
They're very much related, Molly. I'm piggyback on Celina now because you can either plant the seed in one, let's say, direction, or you can also showcase the fruit. And what we've done, for example, was actually doing very small POCs, kind of like mini moonshot projects to showcase, well, there's opportunities. We can deliver MVPs even in smaller scale. And this is actually the fruit that the business wanted to see. Show them the money, where the money is, and then business always say, all right, let's go for it. Let's hire 100 people, not 100, but okay, a few people. But at the end, it's what Celina said. So if reporting into like the business function, maybe it's harder to negotiate, to understand that you should transform the data organization, not only into a support function, but rather going into a, let's say, a partner, right? So data needs to be a partner with tech and business to be really innovative and to really drive the impact. And this is how we did it, to drive forward small project MVPs to showcase the real value. With that, of course, then the business team started to realize, well, you can actually do more with data, just not only reporting, but actually support in automation and decision-making, and actually really drive revenue forward and drive innovation forward. And this is how we created this more decentralized organization, what we have in HelloFresh at the moment, where there's a lot of room for innovation, because everybody as a subject matter expert sitting either in data or sitting in one of the business domains, they have ideas and they're working together, which then enables both individuals, for example, a data and a business person or a tech person, to really brainstorm innovative, great ideas. And this actually, was a great case to showcase people. There's the need for data professionals, and they really drive the impact and change the way how people work within HelloFresh.
Right. That makes a ton of sense. And so a question kind of piggybacking off of that is, how do you, I guess, Trupti, you brought up a point of automation and trying to like automate certain processes and things. And there's a buzzword around self-service and making platforms and data products self-service. What does that look like for your different organizations? Is that even achievable? I think people use it in a lot of different contexts. So either it would be like self-service for the data team or self-service for the stakeholders. So I'm curious what your team's approaches are to building self-service, if that even exists.
I guess self-service, the way I would look at it is making sure your business stakeholders that are probably not as technically savvy should be able to get the data they need, and then maybe do basic pivoting and Excel functions on top of it, so that you are not becoming the blocker. And also, that's not the kind of work, if you hire top of the class data people, they don't want to be stuck day in, day out just building dashboards or in different formats. It's like once the row is here and then the columns are here and then pivot it. It's fun first to just learn and get the lay of the land, but then you want to make it self-service. So that's my definition of self-service, where making data accessible may not be in the correct, I exaggerate a little bit, but in the correct formatting and fonts and colors, but that's something that the operations team can do based on what their audience is, and like pivot it and do calculations. But once you give them the data and make it accessible, that to me is self-service, or one definition or one use case, and to the stakeholders there. But you also asked about within data team, and I think that's again playing with the stack. The more granular or closer to the raw data you get, I think you have to be the leader there, or if you have the full stack, then you have to be mindful that the next the next one coming in the stack has the similar ease of use. So at Uber, we used to have ML engineers do end-to-end like raw data cleansing and also building models and labeling and being involved in all of the step of the way. Was that great for their learning? Yes, but should they be doing that for such a long period of time? Maybe not. At some point, I think when we were much smaller, they used to do all of that, but then we kind of scaled our platforms. And to Celina's point, it's harder to define that. But then if you're orged in the right structure and your manager and your leadership understand and they have been through those pains, then you can get that and make the next stack's problem easier. So I would look at it that way, inwards versus your external stakeholders.
Right, right. Clemence, how does your team at HelloFresh define self-service?
Google. No. Well, self-service is defined within the data organization, maybe different than with the products that we provide our customers internally, because our aim, of course, is to have a solid framework in place, which is scalable, and a data platform in place, which can be used by our customers internally for self-service. But this also means multiple things. This means that we have to work on those 4 different pillars that I mentioned before. A lot of people mention for data strategy, you have to work with the people that they understand data literacy, that they know where to find data, how to use the platform, and you can certify that. Then you have processes in place that people actually follow this compliancy of, for example, validation, right? So you can have to use this platform or dashboard building, reports building the right way. And then you have technology where we provide this data platform to our consumers. And of course, then it's somehow like a governance and the data operations behind. So how we define it is that we want to enable our data consumers and producers to actually use the platform like what we all do when we order things online, maybe. And somebody else is giving us a product, we are also buying it, and somebody else is putting this on the platform. So this would be the self-service for internal customer. For us, we want to provide this data platform to our internal customers.
Got it. And then Celina, how does your team kind of make product self-service, or what does self-service look like at TULA?
Yeah, I think of it as like a matrix where I'm dealing with 2 variables at TULA, and I think TULA is probably the smallest company amongst Trupti and Clemence. For us, it is around what Clemence mentioned, data literacy. I do think, every single company or industry or product or service you're providing to consumers also defines how data literate, I would say, your organization is, where in some cases you may be hiring a lot of data-centric individuals versus, in our case, we may have folks who are more creative. And so you're starting from a different point of literacy. Versus folks on our growth team, they're very data centric, right? And so I'm dealing with that factor. And then of course, self-service, how much is self-service? So in that case, our data team has built dashboards and reports that are standardized. So if someone on the growth team wants to jump in, totally self-service, can pivot, in our BI tool. Whereas if they're getting into something deeper and don't know where to find the tool, or perhaps it's not built, or integrated yet, they wouldn't know how to get that right. So then that gets to a point of, well, you can't be 100% self-service there. How do you come back to Clemence's point, governance? It's like, what is that checkpoint of, hey, question for the data team. How do I add XYZ fields? I don't see it. So from my standpoint, I think self-service is certainly a buzzword, and it's how do you measure what's 0 to 100% and then what's 0 to 100% of data literacy amongst your team.
Right.
Right quadrant, I would say, is where you sit in like the higher percentage of self-service.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of jumping off of that a bit. So as you're building a data team and you're making your stakeholders more data literate, which is certainly part of that, how do you kind of balance the obligations of data governance and data privacy, security, like everything that's kind of wrapped up into that. If you're making data more accessible and operational, you also, have to be sure that the data, isn't too accessible, so it's not being seen by people who probably shouldn't see it, or whatever it is. Particularly like in fintech, like something like Afterpay, you're dealing with credit card information and very sensitive data. So what are your guys' approaches to data governance? Is that something that you is part of the charter for your teams? And I guess maybe Celina, why don't you start that one, since we could kind of go back around here.
Sure. Yeah. I think my perspective on it is it's always an ongoing thing for us, right? Like you mentioned, we're chartering it. And so what I often see is when you're at a small company, you just start going for it, right? Hey, folks, here's the data, here's the analysis, et cetera. And as we've continued to scale the company, we're starting to get to the point of governance, privacy, access, and controls over that, and in particular, PII. So I think we are at a point and a cusp of establishing what is governance, who needs access to what, and what needs to be removed at this point, especially as I think as an industry, we're getting more and more serious about regulations around privacy.
Right. Awesome. Thanks, Celina. And Trupti, how about you?
Yeah, I think I agree with that. It's an evolution, and it also depends on which sector. Like you've pointed out, fintech is obviously highly regulated, and you are dealing with people's very sensitive information. So we have tables that will have these PII fields that only few people with like all the way to leadership has to approve those accesses. And then there are some which obviously sit with the encrypted and stuff. And so those can be a little bit more accessible, again, for the people who are more technically savvy. Otherwise, they sit in dashboards, which is already a lot more transformed. But and we're also a global company, right? So with every year in the US, there are state laws. We have GDPR in California. Europe has even stricter laws, and we are Australia and so on. So we have to comply with that, obviously. So legal also, believe it or not, comes into picture a lot, especially if you're fintech or any of these highly regulated industries. But I would say, I would say it's an evolution where at some point when the product itself is small, right, you literally have maybe a handful of consumers, or it's still growing and everyone wants to look at it. It probably sits in an Excel spreadsheet, or it can sit that way. And that's the best way to learn. So most companies, I would say, I have seen is err on the side of like trusting, because we are all owners and know our duties, and so trusting when to reveal what. And then if there are cases, or when the data becomes big, or it's the product is launched, it's not in staging anymore, and things like that, is when you'll have more of controls and like firewalls and who can access what, especially if you're external facing, those kind of different roles. But I can't speak specifically to other roles, but as a data team, technically you should have access with proper training to most of the data, because that's what is going to make your analysis richer.
Right. Absolutely. And then Clemence, I feel like you could write a book on data governance if you haven't already. But why would you mind summarizing kind of HelloFresh's approach to scaling data governance?
It's on page 57 on my book. Let me give me 10 seconds to think about it. In the end, it's a summary what Celina and Trupti mentioned. And what I believe in is that yes, you can use technology for governance, everything around hashing, PI data, and so on, which is my more defensive approach for data governance. But you can also use a more offensive strategy by making data available to the right people and increase the mobility of data across the organization. And when you actually think about what Trupti mentioned, revolution, right? So when we think about revolution of data in organizations, is maybe similar to how we went through an evolution in transport. And at some point, when I go on the streets now, I do have a driver license and I know how to act on the streets because there are policies and rules. I know that if I go to a different country, currently I'm in Berlin, if I go to the different country, Australia, for example, I understand still the same rules, even if I have a different steering wheel. I understand the basics. So this is linked to data literacy, right? And if we are capable of providing this whole framework, where the framework covers the roads and the streets, the technology covers the red lights, the controls about risk and controls. If they cover the literacy, everybody has a certification on the license, for example, and they understand the concept of data lineage and data end-to-end production, then I think a company is getting ready to mature and go through this revolution of governance in the next stage. And at some point, you maybe have more automation and you have self-driving cars or maybe flying cars. So this would be going from stage to stage.
Right. Awesome. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Anyone in the audience, feel free to ask a question in the Zoom Q&A. If not, that's totally fine. I have plenty of questions for folks in kind of our last 10 or so minutes here. So I guess kind of moving from kind of philosophical to more tactical questions here. Celina, are there any kind of like tools or processes that you found really effective to kind of keep your data team productive and on task? I know particularly at a startup, it can be difficult trying to field like ad hoc questions and kind of the more, I don't know, like fire drilly things versus like long-term strategic projects. How do you keep your team productive and kind of on task and working towards the same goals?
It is the bane of our existence at a startup, right? Because everything is a priority. But one thing that we've actually established and try to keep everyone on task and focus on is we created a data request channel. And I know, quite a few companies probably have had this. And one thing we implemented, we actually borrow from Slack, where there's a color code to your requests. And so if it's urgent, make it red. If it's like, hey, within the next 2 to 5 days or so, make it blue. If it's long-term, make it white, right? And so in that, you're indicating to us, how urgent is this request? Or is it just an idea, right? Because if it's urgent, then our team's like, okay, well, jump on that, ask questions, understand why we need this by end of day. Whereas if something is a bigger picture, a higher level, that garners like a need for more discussion. Is this something that is longer term? Is it next quarter? So that's one tactic that we've found useful. I think it also serves the purpose of showing other stakeholders the data team's busy, right? Because despite having tried creating roadmaps in Asana and trying to showcase that, let's be honest, how many people jump into Asana just to check what's your team's progress like right now, right? But I think because everyone's so focused on Slack, you're able to see, look at all these questions that are coming through, the data team's busy. And so it solves both the problem of what is the urgency of this? What is someone else asking? What is the team working on? And third, it inspires other questions, right? Because maybe someone who's less data literate or perhaps afraid to ask a question may think, oh, well, so-and-so asked that question, so it's not a dumb question. And how do I apply that to my team?
Absolutely. Having that paper trail of previous requests could really help reduce duplication. Trupti or Clemence, anything to add to this? How do you keep your teams focused and productive? Maybe Trupti, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. I think I agree. Transparency is the key. Making your work available and like accessible, and also what the team is working on and when will something be ready is something we have actually learned and made it more accessible and in whatever formats, right? So like the other folks have said, some people are very tech savvy, and so Jira and Jira roadmaps work, but Some people are day in, day out in slides. So I just made a slide of like, when should you expect our bill to go out, and the first version of it. And so until then, basically that resource is blocked doing that. And so the more you make that accessible, but also vocalize it and basically have the leadership, whoever is your stakeholder and their leadership are in sync, that this is what the roadmap is set, that kind of builds that top-down agreement as well, that this is what we are going to do with the limited resources we have. Because in a smaller company, everything is a priority, and if everything's priority, nothing's priority. So you have to force them to stack rank. And also something like I like to say is asking questions is free, but when you put resources to it, that's where the rubber meets the road, and it's hard to get answers to it. So which answers do you want faster, or which are important and really driving the needle? So if you have a company's priorities set, then you can always point it to that, saying, where does it fit in our company priorities? So that will help me stack rank my own limited resource pool into why this is such a burning priority. And having some 10-15% extra buffer bandwidth has never hurt, especially if you're a smaller team, because there will be cases when some C-level exec just wants it, and you're not going to go through this process with them. You just have to make sure that bandwidth is there to jump on it and just move on.
Yeah, for sure. And this actually ties into one of the questions that was asked in the chat, how you serve multiple departments and split your costs, whether that's resources, money, whatever it is. And Clemence, do you want to tackle that one?
Yes, I can do that. So the question is how to split costs of the resources, infrastructure, manpower across different departments. And I would assume the question aims for tech, data, or business departments. What we implement actually is a decentralized approach where we have, not decentralized, let's say integrated approach, where we have analysts, data scientists, or even engineers sitting directly with the business teams, which means the business teams actually hold the budget. They own the cost. However, we have a central data organization with capability building. So we split the how and the what. So we have capability building is how to do things, and the what to do, which is prioritized by the business, who has the budget. Together, if you imagine this, a team is defining the priorities, another team is doing the capability building. Both need to coexist, equal in authority, equal in amount of collaboration, because at some point engineers, they want to learn from other engineers, right? So we need to, from a central data org, increase capabilities. And then the budget where the engineers, data scientists, analysts are sitting in the business, work very, very close together with the business, but also are basically part of the chapter, right? Part of the guild, the organization, part of the family. This is how we actually split the two things, how and what.
Definitely. Great answer. And then I think our last question comes from Scott about hiring. And this was actually one of the questions on my list too, but the hiring market is so hot right now. And it's been, at least at my company, it's been really hard to hire just across all sorts of roles because the market is on fire. How do you get your teams and company and like job recs to stand out in the market? I'm sure hiring and recruiting is a big part of your jobs. What are some of your tips and tricks for standing out? Trupti, do you want to start that one?
Sure. I guess it's hard. I wouldn't lie. It is any market that is this hot is always hard. But I guess when you nail and get that first signature or even that hire, it makes you that much more proud because, it's when things are hard and still people are coming, there's an extra fulfillment. How you go about it? I guess in my case, if I sense or if I see a talent whether it be conference, interns in the past organizations, cross-functional teams, again, in previous companies, wherever. I think I would say if you're a hiring manager or a potential hiring manager or what have you, you should plant the seed there where, like, because talent is so rare, you want to start there. And when you have a rec open is when you can like tap into that, but that's an ongoing, it's like almost like a mentorship relationship. Your hiring shouldn't start when the rec is open and you see it on LinkedIn. The hiring starts much before that. And how do you make it palatable to them when there are so many different options is what career track are you giving it to them? Ownership, responsibility, how they will grow, contribute, and see their career flourishing. So your company values, your own values, and then showing them the scope of what they could do. I think it's valuable, and making them owners always helps. So I guess mostly, I would say the things that you wouldn't think of, I didn't say monetary benefits or anything like that, I think is where you can add value, because everything else companies are now able to match. And remote, okay, this salary, okay, equity, okay, but then these are the things that you can distinguish yourself, saying, showing them the track and mentorship and being different.
Right. That makes a ton of sense. Celina, what are some of your tricks and tips for building your team and attracting top talent for TULA?
Yeah, certainly a hot topic right now and top of mind always. I think one is always, aside from the monetary to the candidate, it's always also putting money towards recruiters. So, convincing your company, we need recruiters, technical recruiters for these roles. Can't do it alone. We need to put money towards this. Number two hits on, what Trupti mentioned, is doing donut chats, right? Like there's so many Slack channels nowadays that have donut chats. And so fostering those relationships, it's not meant to just hire folks. I'm out there learning as well, but you never know who you're going to come across who may be your next hire. So I think investing in that time is critical, because that's what makes you stand out. There are so many attractive offers right now out there in the market that the only differentiator is your company's mission and your philosophy on management and their career growth. And does that match their personal and professional needs? So, if that resonates with the candidate, then you're able to get them over the hurdle. But otherwise, to Trupti's point, monetary value is pretty much dangling out there, and there's nothing, unless you're a hedge fund who can dangle more, right? It's very, very difficult. So those are kind of the tactics that we've done our best to try to implement for recruiting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Great answer. And Clemence, how about you? I know HelloFresh is in a bit of a different stage than Afterpay and TULA. What does your
I say we are also hiring.
Yes. So what I guess, how do you make your roles and job recs stand out in the competitive market?
I really like what Celina said in regards of learning and having conversations, because from a rational or logical breakdown, what is a hiring process looks like, right? It's kind of like a pitch from both sides. The best pitch always is a conversation, because you're actually learning more from each side. So what we try to do is to provide everyone who is out there opportunities to learn, sharing how we do the things on our blog post, for example, but also have a lot of conversation with potential colleagues, not necessarily for the hiring purpose, but just to have conversations to learn from each other. The reason is, if I think about the different job positions that we have in the company today, we didn't know that we would have them 5 years ago, which means if we actually have conversations with different communities and different individuals, then that gives us even more ideas on how we could maybe structure the teams where opportunities would would open up. And I think this is something that we also communicate, that learning at HelloFresh never stops. We are supporting everybody who is joining HelloFresh in their career growth. And there's a lot of opportunities also internally to grow into different areas.
Absolutely. Well said, all of you. Thank you so much for joining us today for this panel about how to build data team at a hypergrowth company, topic that you all are very, very familiar with. And thank you for everyone who tuned in today to check it out. The recording should be live soon on the Data Mesh Learning channel. And as all three of them mentioned, all of their companies are hiring. They're all awesome places to work. So if you have questions for any of them, I imagine the best way to get a hold of you folks is through LinkedIn okay, awesome. Find Clemence, Trupti, or Celina on LinkedIn and reach out about opportunities. But until then, thank you so much for attending and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Molly, for organizing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.